I posted my son's beach treasure find on Facebook, and 3 hours later, armed men were at our door. The whole thing started when my 7-year-old Timmy came running up with sand all over his face, screaming about pirate gold. When I followed him to his hole near the rocks, there was an actual wooden chest about the size of a microwave, covered in barnacles and seaweed. Timmy was bouncing around while I pried it open with driftwood, and when the lid popped up, we both just stared. Wrapped in plastic bags were stacks and stacks of $100 bills, more money than I'd ever seen. Being the proud dad I am, I snapped a photo of Timmy grinning next to his treasure chest and posted it on Facebook. My little pirate found actual treasure at the beach today. Can you believe this? Within 20 minutes, it had over 100 likes and dozens of comments. 3 hours later, someone knocked on our apartment door so hard the whole frame shook. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 men in expensive suits standing in my hallway. When I opened the door with the chain still on, the bigger one, who had a scar running from his ear to his jaw, said in this calm voice that made my skin crawl, "You have something that belongs to the Torino family, and we're here to collect it." The smaller one pulled out his phone and showed me my own Facebook post, zoomed in on the chest. "This was buried by our associate 3 years ago when the cops were after us, and that money has blood on it," he said, then looked past me at Timmy playing video games. "Beautiful boy you got there. Would be a shame if something happened to him because his father made a stupid decision." The bigger one handed me a business card with just a phone number on it. "You have 24 hours to return every single bill, and we know exactly how much is there," he said, pushing his jacket aside just enough for me to see the gun in his waistband. "If even $20 is missing, or if you call the cops, we'll know, and your son will grow up without a father." The problem was, I'd already called the police that morning and turned in the money, thinking I was doing the right thing, and maybe there'd be a finder's fee. Detective Brooks had seemed thrilled, saying this was evidence in a big case. When I called him back after the men left, frantically explaining about the threats, he went silent for so long, I thought the call had dropped. "That money is evidence now, and I cannot give it back to you no matter what," he finally said. I begged him, told him about the threat against Timmy, even started crying, but he just kept saying his hands were tied. The patrol car he promised never came. I called back 6 times, getting different officers who all said the same thing about the money being evidence. I even drove to the station with Timmy, but they wouldn't let me pass the front desk. The desk sergeant looked at me like I was crazy when I explained the mob was going to kill me over money I didn't have anymore. By 8 p.m., I was pacing around trying to figure out if we could run to my sister in Boston when my phone rang from a blocked number. 16 hours left, the voice said. "The Torinos don't give extensions." I tried to explain about the police, but he cut me off. "Your problem to solve? Not ours." The next morning, with 4 hours left, I was sitting in Detective Brooks's office, literally on my knees begging, when another detective burst in. "Brooks, we got a problem with the Torino evidence," he said, not even noticing me on the floor. Brooks went pale and asked what kind of problem. "The money's gone from the evidence locker. Someone took it last night." Brooks jumped up and ran out, leaving me alone in his office, and that's when I saw it on his desk, a receipt for $50,000 deposited into his bank account yesterday, and underneath it, a text message printed out that said, "Payment confirmed for the information, T." The T had to be Torino. Brooks was working for them. I grabbed the papers and ran out of the station, but when I got to my car, the same 2 men from yesterday were leaning against it. "Time's up," the scarred one said, but before I could respond, black SUVs surrounded us, and FBI agents poured out with guns drawn. "Nobody move!" an agent shouted, and the scarred man looked at me with pure hatred. "You set us up with the feds?" he said. "Your son is dead." But the FBI agent closest to me grabbed my arm and said something that made my blood freeze. "Mr. Walker, your ex-wife Lisa told us everything about your plan to steal mob money and frame the Torinos." I stared at him in complete shock. "What plan?" "I don't have an ex-wife named Lisa." The agent pulled out a file with photos that someone had clearly messed with on a computer, showing a woman's face pasted next to me at the beach, helping me dig up the chest. "These are fake," I screamed. "Someone used a computer to put her face in these pictures." But the agent was already putting handcuffs on me while the Torino men smiled. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The metal dug into my wrists as 2 agents grabbed my arms and pushed me toward a black SUV. I kept yelling that the photos were fake, that I didn't have an ex-wife, that someone was setting me up, but nobody was listening. The Torino men stood there watching with these satisfied looks on their faces, like they'd just won something. One agent shoved my head down and pushed me into the back seat, then climbed in next to me while another agent got behind the wheel. The door slammed shut, and we pulled away from the police station, leaving the Torino guys standing there in the parking lot. The agent sitting next to me was maybe 40 with short dark hair and this calm expression that made me want to scream. He pulled out a badge and showed it to me. His name was Dan Marshall, FBI. He started talking in this steady voice about how they'd been investigating my conspiracy for weeks now. I stared at him like he was speaking a different language. He said my ex-wife Lisa had contacted them 6 weeks ago with detailed information about our plan to steal mob money and frame the Torino family. I couldn't even form words for a few seconds. Then I managed to say I'd never been married, I didn't know anyone named Lisa, and this whole thing was crazy. Dan pulled out a folder and showed me printed emails supposedly from Lisa describing our entire scheme. The emails had dates going back months, talking about finding the buried money, setting up the Torinos, even discussing what to do with Timmy during the operation. None of it was real, but it looked so official with timestamps and everything. My brain kept trying to figure out who would do this, who had the skills to create a whole fake person with a fake history and fake emails, who would go to this much trouble to destroy my life. We pulled up to a big federal building downtown, and the agents walked me inside through a back entrance. People in suits were everywhere, walking fast with files and phones. They took me to an interrogation room, just a small space with a metal table and chairs bolted to the floor. Dan sat across from me while another agent stood by the door. They took off the handcuffs, but told me not to try anything stupid. Dan opened a bigger file and started laying out papers on the table. Bank statements with my name showing deposits of thousands of dollars that I never made. Text messages between me and Lisa planning the whole thing. Rental agreements for storage units I'd never heard of. Everything was designed to make me look guilty. I kept saying to check the computer data on the photos to prove Lisa didn't exist, but Dan just shook his head. He said their tech people already verified everything. The photos were real, the bank accounts were real, Lisa was real. I felt like I was losing my mind. How could they verify things that didn't exist? Then Dan said something about metadata matching and digital signatures, using words I didn't understand. He kept pushing papers at me, showing me more and more evidence. There were photos of me at locations I'd never been to, credit card receipts from stores I'd never visited. It was like someone had built a complete fake version of my life. After maybe an hour of this, Dan stood up and said I could make one phone call. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely hold the phone. I dialed Larissa's number in Boston, and she picked up on the second ring. I started talking fast, trying to explain that the FBI arrested me, but I didn't do anything, and the Torino men had threatened Timmy, and she needed to get him right now and take him somewhere safe. Larissa sounded confused and scared. She kept asking what was happening, and I kept saying there wasn't time to explain everything. I begged her to go to my apartment, get Timmy from the neighbor watching him, pack a bag and leave town. She said okay, she'd leave right now and drive down. I told her to take him to a hotel outside the city and not tell anyone where they were going. She promised she would even though she didn't understand what was happening. I could hear the fear in her voice. Then Dan took the phone away and ended the call. A woman in a dark suit walked into the room and introduced herself as Kayla Marshall, a federal prosecutor. She wasn't related to Dan, just had the same last name. She sat down and opened another folder, this one even thicker. She started listing charges they were planning to file against me. Conspiracy to commit theft, money laundering, obstruction of justice, filing false police reports. Each charge felt like a punch to the stomach. Kayla said the evidence was overwhelming and suggested I cooperate by telling them where I hid the stolen money and who else was involved in the conspiracy. When I said again that I was framed, she let out this long sigh like she'd heard the same excuse 1,000 times. She said everyone claims they're innocent, but the evidence doesn't lie. Then she stood up and left, without saying anything else. 2 agents came in and told me to stand up. They put the handcuffs back on and walked me out to a different vehicle. We drove to the county jail, a big ugly building with bars on all the windows. They processed me through booking, taking my photo and fingerprints and personal stuff. The whole time, my brain kept trying to make sense of who would frame me like this. I'd taken one photo of Timmy with the chest and posted it on Facebook. That was literally the only thing I'd done. But someone had used that photo to build an entire fake conspiracy with fake bank accounts and fake text messages and a fake person. This required serious computer skills and resources. The Torino family wanted their money back, but framing me didn't get them the money. It just put me in jail where I definitely couldn't return anything. Detective Brooks was corrupt and working with the Torinos, but he already had the money. Why would they need to frame me too? Nothing made sense. They put me in a cell with another guy who was maybe 30, covered in tattoos. He told me he was waiting for trial on drug charges. He started explaining the basic survival rules for jail, like don't make eye contact with certain people and don't touch anyone's food. I barely heard him because I was mentally going through every person I knew, trying to figure out who could be behind this. My neighbor? My boss? Some random person who saw my Facebook post? None of them had the skills or connections to pull off something this big. The next morning, a guard brought me to a small meeting room where a young guy in a cheap suit was waiting. He introduced himself as Percy Cooley, the public defender assigned to my case. He looked maybe 25 and kind of nervous. He opened a file and started reading through the evidence, and I watched his face get more and more worried. After a few minutes, he looked up at me and admitted this was way more complex than cases he usually handled. Federal charges, organized crime connections, computer stuff he didn't really understand. He said the evidence looked really convincing, and maybe I should think about taking a plea deal. Juries tend to trust FBI investigations, he said. I started explaining about Brooks being corrupt and how I'd grabbed papers from his desk showing he got paid by the Torinos. Percy's face got even more worried. He said those papers were evidence I stole from a police station, which actually made me look more guilty, not less. He was trying to be helpful, but I could tell he had no idea how to handle a case where the cops themselves were dirty. I realized I needed a different lawyer, someone who wouldn't be scared of federal prosecutors and corrupt police. Percy left after promising to file some basic paperwork, but I could tell he was relieved to get out of that room. Later that afternoon, a guard told me I had a phone call. It was Larissa calling from a hotel. She'd gotten Timmy, and they were staying somewhere outside the city. She didn't want to say exactly where over the phone. Timmy kept asking when I was coming home and why the FBI took me away. She didn't know what to tell him. Then I heard Timmy crying in the background, asking if I was a bad guy. My son thought I was a criminal. That hurt worse than anything else that had happened. I tried to tell Larissa to explain to him that I didn't do anything wrong, but my voice broke, and I couldn't get the words out. The guard said my time was up and took the phone away. That night, I lay on the thin jail mattress staring at the ceiling while my cellmate snored on the bunk below me. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept working through the timeline. Someone saw my Facebook post within minutes of me posting it. They created the fake Lisa identity. They made months of fake evidence. They got Brooks to steal the real money. They set up my arrest. All of this happened in about 20 hours. This wasn't just some random criminal. This required planning and resources and access to law enforcement computer systems. This was way beyond what typical organized crime could pull off. Someone with serious technical skills and connections had decided to destroy my life, and I had no idea who or why. The next morning, a guard woke me up early and said I had a visitor. I got walked down to the same small meeting room where Percy had been, and when the door opened, a woman in a dark gray suit was sitting there with a leather briefcase on the table. She stood up and shook my hand firmly. She introduced herself as Aurelia Hassan and said she was a defense attorney who handled cases about government corruption and people getting blamed for things they didn't do. My sister Larissa had called her after spending hours online looking for lawyers who fought federal cases, and she'd looked at the basic facts of what happened to me. She believed someone was framing me. She told me she worked on contingency for cases like mine, where regular people got trapped by cops and prosecutors who were dirty. She wanted to take my case if I'd let her. I almost started crying right there because she was the first person who seemed to actually believe me. She pulled out a yellow legal pad and asked me to walk her through everything from the beginning. I told her about Timmy finding the chest, posting the photo on Facebook, the Torino guys showing up, and threatening us, turning the money into the police, Brooks acting helpful at first, discovering his corruption papers, and then the FBI arrest with all the fake evidence about some woman named Lisa, who doesn't exist. Aurelia wrote everything down and kept asking specific questions about timing. When did I post the photo? When did the Torinos show up? When did I call Brooks? When did I get arrested? She made a timeline on her pad with all the times written out, and then she tapped her pen on the paper. She pointed out that the fake evidence supposedly showed me planning this whole thing for several months, but the entire situation only existed for about 24 hours before the FBI grabbed me. That timeline didn't make any sense. If I'd been planning to steal mob money for months, why would I post a photo on Facebook that brought the mob to my door within 3 hours? Why would I turn the money into the police if I wanted to keep it? The prosecution's story had a huge hole in it, and that timeline problem was our first real way to fight back. She said she was going to file motions right away to examine all the digital evidence. The photos, the bank statements, the text messages, all of it had metadata that would show when the files were actually created. If everything was made recently like she suspected, that would prove the frame up. She stood up and told me to hang in there, that she was going to fight this hard. Over the next week, Aurelia filed a bunch of legal papers with the court arguing that the metadata would prove the photos and documents were created recently, not over months, like the prosecution claimed. The federal prosecutor, Kayla Marshall, fought back, saying the evidence had already been checked by FBI computer experts, and it was all real. But the judge granted Aurelia's request for an independent person to look at everything. Aurelia hired a digital forensics expert named Gavin Tillman, who'd testified in dozens of federal cases and had a reputation for being really good at his job and impossible to make look bad on the witness stand. He came to visit me in jail a few days later. Gavin was maybe 40, kind of quiet, and he had this way of asking super specific technical questions that showed he really knew his stuff. He asked me to explain exactly what happened with the Facebook post, and when I told him about taking the photo and posting it right away, his eyes lit up. He said that was the trigger point for everything. Someone with serious computer skills could have used facial recognition software to identify me from my Facebook profile within minutes of me posting. Then they built the whole fake evidence thing around my digital footprint, using information they pulled from my social media and public records. It was sophisticated work that required access to law enforcement computer systems, but it could be done fast by someone who knew what they were doing. Meanwhile, Larissa was running out of money keeping herself and Timmy in different hotels every few nights. She couldn't go back to her apartment in Boston because she was scared the Torinos would track them down there. She called me crying one night saying she didn't know what to do, and I felt completely helpless stuck in jail. I told Aurelia about it the next time she visited, and she made some calls. She got Larissa and Timmy into a safe house run by a group that usually helped women escaping violent relationships, but sometimes they helped families caught in dangerous legal situations too. Larissa moved them in there, and she told me Timmy was having bad dreams almost every night and kept asking when he could see me. Hearing that my 7-year-old son was having nightmares because of this whole mess made me want to punch the walls. A few days later, Gavin finished his first round of analysis and came back to see Aurelia. She visited me right after with this small smile on her face, the first time I'd seen her smile since taking my case. Gavin had found exactly what she hoped he would. Every single piece of digital evidence was created within a 6-hour window on the day after I found the chest. The photos showing fake Lisa helping me dig up the money were manipulated that morning using professional photo editing software. The bank statements were made that afternoon using templates that matched real bank formats. The text messages were backdated, but all created in the same batch of files. Whoever framed me worked really fast, but left digital fingerprints all over everything. The metadata didn't lie. Aurelia immediately filed an emergency motion to dismiss the charges based on Gavin's findings. The judge ordered a hearing to look at the evidence, and I got brought to the courthouse in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. Gavin took the stand and presented his analysis, showing exactly how each piece of evidence was fake and when it was created. He had charts and graphs and technical explanations that made it crystal clear. Kayla Marshall looked genuinely shocked, sitting at the prosecutor's table. She kept flipping through her own files like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. The judge didn't dismiss the charges right then, but he ordered the FBI to do their own independent check of everything, and he said I could post bail over Kayla's objections. The bail was set at $50,000. Larissa used her entire retirement savings to pay it, and 8 days after getting arrested, I walked out of that jail into the sunlight. Larissa was waiting outside with Timmy, and my son ran at me so fast he almost knocked me over. He wrapped his arms around my waist and started crying, asking if I was going to disappear again. I promised him I wasn't going anywhere, but when I looked down at his face, I could see he didn't fully trust that promise anymore. The FBI had already taken me away once. Larissa drove us to the safe house, which was a regular-looking house in a quiet neighborhood with bars on the windows and really good locks. That night, around 2 a.m, Timmy started screaming in his sleep. His screams woke up everyone in the house. I ran into his room and found him sitting up in bed, shaking and crying. I held him, and he sobbed into my chest for a long time before he could talk. He finally told me that the Torino men had come to our apartment door, and he'd heard them threatening to hurt him if I didn't give them something. He'd been scared for days that they would come back, and now he was also scared the police would take me away again. My 7-year-old son had been dealing with threats from both criminals and law enforcement, and I realized he'd been traumatized by both sides. The people who were supposed to protect us had hurt him just as much as the bad guys. The next day, Aurelia set up a meeting with an internal affairs investigator named Quentin Buckner, who handled corruption cases inside the police department. We met him at a coffee shop away from the police station. I showed him the papers I'd grabbed from Brooks's desk, the bank receipt showing $50,000 deposited into Brooks's account, and the text message saying payment confirmed from someone with the initial T. Quentin looked at the papers for a long time without saying anything. He was skeptical at first, asking how I knew these were real and not something I'd made up. But then Aurelia pulled out copies of Gavin's forensic analysis, showing the frame-up, and she walked him through the whole timeline of what happened. Quentin's face got more serious as he listened. He finally said he would open an official investigation into Brooks, but he warned us it would take time, and we shouldn't expect fast results. Internal affairs moved slowly and carefully, especially when investigating one of their own detectives. But at least someone was finally looking into Brooks's corruption, and that felt like a small step forward. 3 days later, Aurelia called me at the safe house, and I could tell from her voice something had changed. She said Kayla Marshall from the FBI prosecutor's office had just contacted her and the FBI's own technical team finished their independent check of all the evidence against me. Their experts confirmed everything Gavin found. Every single piece of evidence was made within a 6-hour window on the day after I found the chest, not over several months like the fake Lisa claimed. The photos were edited that morning, the bank statements were created that afternoon, the text messages were backdated, but made in one batch. Kayla admitted their case was falling apart, but she needed to understand who created the false evidence and why, because someone with really good technical skills used federal systems to frame an innocent person. Aurelia sounded cautiously hopeful for the first time since taking my case. 2 days after that phone call, someone knocked on the safe house door, and when I looked through the peephole, I saw Agent Dan Marshall standing there alone. He was the FBI agent who arrested me in the parking lot. I opened the door with the chain on, and he held up both hands. He asked if he could talk to me off the record. I let him in, and he looked embarrassed, standing in the living room shifting his weight from foot to foot. He explained that a woman calling herself Lisa contacted the FBI 6 weeks ago, claiming to be my ex-wife, with information about a plan to steal mob money. She provided papers that looked real enough to open an investigation. The FBI never actually met Lisa in person. All contact was through encrypted emails and phone calls, with voice changing that she claimed was needed for her safety. Dan kept apologizing while he talked. He admitted the FBI should have checked Lisa's identity before building a case against me, but she provided so much detailed information about my life. She knew my address, my work history, my daily routines, even had photos of Timmy. The information was so specific and accurate that they believed she was real. Someone studied my entire life carefully enough to create a fake identity that could fool federal investigators. Dan said the question now was who had the reason, the resources, and the access to pull this off. After Dan left, Aurelia called Gavin and Quentin and asked them to come to the safe house. That evening, we all sat around the kitchen table trying to work out who benefits from framing me. I kept going over it in my head. The Torinos wanted their money back, but framing me doesn't get them the money. I'm just a regular guy who found their chest and turned it into the police. Brooks is corrupt and stole the evidence, but he already got paid by the Torinos for stealing it. So why go through the complicated frame-up? Larissa was upstairs putting Timmy to bed while we talked. There was a missing piece we weren't seeing. Gavin spread out his forensic analysis papers on the table and suggested we look at who had access to create the fake evidence. He explained it required law enforcement databases to build convincing bank statements and text message records. It also needed really good photo editing skills and knowledge of federal investigation procedures. That combination pointed to someone inside law enforcement with technical abilities and connections to both the Torinos and the FBI investigation. Quentin had been running background checks on everyone involved in the evidence chain. He pulled out a file and said he discovered that Brooks has a cousin who works as a technical contractor for the FBI. The cousin's name is Vincent Hester, and he has access to federal systems and the skills to make fake digital evidence. Quentin showed us financial records with large cash deposits into Vincent's accounts around the same time Brooks received his Torino payment. The deposits were almost as big as what Brooks got. We all looked at each other as the pieces fell into place. Vincent created the fake Lisa identity and made all the evidence as a favor to Brooks. Brooks needed a fall guy after stealing the money from the evidence locker. By framing me for conspiracy, Brooks could claim I was the one who stole the evidence, and the FBI would stop investigating the missing money because they'd think they caught the thief. It was a cover-up scheme to protect Brooks's theft and his Torino connections. Aurelia grabbed the files and said she was taking this information to Kayla Marshall first thing in the morning. The next day, Aurelia met with Kayla and brought in Clifford Mays, who was the lead FBI agent on the Torino family investigation. Aurelia called me from the FBI office and said Clifford was really mad that one of their contractors made fake evidence and manipulated their investigation. He ordered an immediate raid on Vincent's home and office. Within hours, FBI agents were going through Vincent's computers and files. They found the software he used to create the fake bank statements. They found the original photos he changed to make it look like Lisa was helping me dig up the chest. They found emails between Vincent and Brooks discussing the frame-up plan in detail. The evidence was overwhelming. The FBI arrested Vincent and Brooks on the same day. Both men were charged with conspiracy, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and fraud. Brooks tried to claim he was working undercover to get inside the Torino family, but the bank deposits and text messages proved he was actually on their payroll the whole time. Vincent got a lawyer immediately and refused to talk, but the evidence from his computers was so strong it didn't matter if he talked or not. 2 days after the arrests, Kayla Marshall formally dropped all charges against me. She issued a public statement saying I was the victim of a complicated frame-up done by corrupt law enforcement officers. She apologized for my wrongful arrest and detention. She promised a full investigation into how the FBI was manipulated into building a false case against an innocent person. The apology felt empty after everything Timmy and I went through, but at least my name was cleared and people would know I didn't do anything wrong. Aurelia called me the day after the charges dropped and said we needed to talk about the Torino family. She came to the safe house and sat across from me at the kitchen table, her face serious. The scarred man and his partner were both locked up on weapons and threatening charges from the parking lot arrest, but the Torino family had more members than just 2 enforcers. Organized crime families don't forget debts, she explained, and they might still blame me for their money ending up as FBI evidence, even though I was cleared of conspiracy. The family knew their cash was sitting in a federal evidence locker instead of back in their hands, and someone might decide I still owed them. I felt my stomach twist because I thought this nightmare was finally over, but Aurelia was telling me it might not be. She said I needed to take the threat seriously and consider my options for protecting Timmy and myself going forward. The next day, Clifford Mays showed up at the safe house with papers about witness protection. He sat down and explained that if I testified against the Torino family members they'd arrested, he could put Timmy and me into the program. New identities, new city, new lives where the Torinos could never find us. But it would mean leaving everything behind. No contact with Larissa or anyone we knew, starting completely over in a place where nobody knew our real names. I looked at the papers and thought about Timmy, who'd already been through so much trauma. Moving him away from his aunt, his school, everything familiar seemed like it would hurt him more than help him. He was already struggling to feel safe, and ripping him away from the few stable things in his life felt wrong. I told Clifford I'd testify without witness protection, and he looked concerned, but said he'd assign FBI agents to provide security for our apartment instead. He made me sign papers acknowledging the risk, and then he had agents install new locks and a full security system at our place. We moved back to our apartment 3 days later, and Timmy was scared the moment we walked through the door. He kept looking at the spot where the Torino men had stood when they threatened us, and his hands were shaking. That first night back, he refused to sleep in his own room. He dragged his blanket and pillow into my room and made a spot on the floor right next to my bed where he could see the door. I tried to convince him his room was safe now with all the new locks and cameras, but he just shook his head and curled up on the floor. Larissa drove down from Boston and stayed with us for a few weeks, sleeping on the couch and helping Timmy adjust to being home. She made breakfast every morning and walked him to the school, trying to rebuild some sense of normal routine. Aurelia called with a recommendation for a child psychologist named Anita Robertson, who worked with kids who'd been threatened or witnessed violence. I made an appointment, and Timmy started seeing her twice a week. The first few sessions he barely talked, just sat in her office playing with toys while she asked gentle questions. But slowly, he started opening up about his fears. He told her about nightmares where men with guns came through our door. He talked about worrying that I'd be taken away again and never come back. He asked her why bad people wanted to hurt us over money we didn't even have anymore, and she helped him work through the confusion and fear. The preliminary hearings for Brooks and Vincent started a few weeks later and stretched over several court dates. I had to testify about finding the chest at the beach, about Brooks's reaction when I first reported it, and about discovering the corruption evidence on his desk. Brooks's lawyer was aggressive, trying to make me look like someone who couldn't be trusted, asking questions designed to confuse me or make my timeline sound unclear. But Gavin's forensic evidence was rock solid, and the papers I'd grabbed from Brooks's desk proved the corruption without any doubt. The judge reviewed everything and ordered both men held without bail while they waited for trial. The Torino family prosecution moved forward at the same time, with the scarred man and the smaller man both facing federal racketeering charges, along with several other family members the FBI had arrested. Clifford Mays explained to me that my testimony about the threats and the buried money helped establish the family's ongoing criminal enterprise. The money itself, which had been recovered from Brooks's house after his arrest, provided evidence of their drug trafficking operations from 3 years ago, when they'd buried it to hide it from police. My accidental discovery had given the FBI the physical evidence they needed to connect the family to specific crimes. When the Torino trial started, I had to take the stand and describe finding the chest, the threats against Timmy, and the 24-hour deadline they'd given me. The scarred man sat at the defense table staring at me the entire time with pure hate in his eyes. I tried not to look at him, focusing on the prosecutor asking questions, but I could feel his stare burning into me. At one point, when the judge was looking down at papers, I saw the scarred man mouth the words, "You're dead," directly at me. My hands started sweating and my voice shook a little, but I kept answering questions. Despite the FBI security outside the courthouse and the agents watching our apartment, I was terrified the family would find some way to get to us, even with their leadership locked up. The defense attorney tried to argue that I'd made up the threats to support my conspiracy defense, claiming I needed a story to explain why I was framed. But the FBI had recordings of the blocked number calls with the countdown to the deadline. They had testimony from neighbors who saw the two men at my apartment door. They had the business card with just a phone number that the scarred man had handed me. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury went out to think about their decision and took 3 days, which felt like forever. When they came back, they said guilty on all counts for both enforcers and 2 other family members. The scarred man showed no emotion when the verdict was read, but his lawyer tried to argue for a lighter sentence. The judge wasn't having it and sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison. 2 months later, Brooks's trial date arrived, but he never made it to court. The evidence of his corruption was so overwhelming that he took a plea deal rather than face a jury. He admitted to stealing the evidence from the locker, accepting payments from the Torino family, and conspiring with Vincent to frame me as a cover-up for his theft. The plea deal got him 15 years in federal prison, and he lost his pension and law enforcement credentials permanently. I didn't go to his sentencing, but Aurelia called me afterward and said he'd looked defeated and old standing in front of the judge. Vincent went to trial, and his lawyer tried to claim he was just following Brooks's instructions without knowing the full context of what he was doing. But the emails from his computer told a different story. They showed he knew exactly what he was doing, creating a fake identity called Lisa, making false evidence with his FBI contractor access, and manipulating a federal investigation to frame an innocent person. The jury took less time than the Torino jury, coming back in just over a day with guilty verdicts on all counts. Vincent got 12 years in federal prison, plus he had to pay me restitution for the damages his false prosecution caused. The judge said the amount would be determined later, but it would cover my legal fees, lost wages, and compensation for the trauma Timmy and I went through. Kayla helped me file a civil rights lawsuit against the police department and the FBI for the wrongful arrest and prosecution, working with Aurelia to build a case that documented every violation of my rights from the moment Brooks ignored my pleas for help. The legal process dragged on for 8 months with depositions and document reviews and meetings with city attorneys who kept offering small settlements that Aurelia told me to reject. Finally, they offered an amount that made Aurelia smile and tell me to take it, enough to cover all of Timmy's therapy bills for years, replace the retirement savings Larissa had spent on my bail, and give us some actual financial security while I figured out what came next. The money showed up in my account on a Tuesday morning, and I sat staring at the balance on my phone screen for 10 minutes because I'd never seen that many digits in my bank account before. It didn't undo the trauma or give back the weeks Timmy and I spent terrified and separated, but it meant I could stop worrying about bills while focusing on helping my son heal. Timmy continued his twice-weekly sessions with Anita, and slowly, over the following months, he started sleeping in his own room again, though he needed a nightlight plugged in near his bed, and the door left open so he could see me down the hall. The nightmares came less often now, maybe once a week instead of every single night, and when they did happen, he could usually calm down faster with Captain curled up next to him. Anita said he was making good progress and starting to talk about the beach again, without his breathing getting fast and his hands shaking. She also warned me that kids are tough and bounce back from things, but the trauma would probably affect him for years in ways we couldn't predict yet, maybe showing up as trust issues or anxiety when he got older. 6 months after that Facebook post that destroyed our lives, I took Timmy to a different beach about 2 hours north, one far away from the rocks where he'd found the chest. He ran around in the sand building a normal castle like a 7-year-old should, using a plastic bucket and shovel we'd bought at a convenience store on the drive up. When he finished patting down the towers and digging a moat around the whole thing, he called me over and asked if we could take a photo of his castle. I pulled out my phone but hesitated with my finger over the camera button, and Timmy noticed right away. This time I took the picture and opened my messages and sent it only to Larissa in a private text, not posting anything publicly where strangers could see it. Timmy watched me send the private message and nodded, then said it was okay, because this one was just sand, not anything that would make bad people come looking for us. Larissa had been visiting every weekend since the trial ended, driving down on Friday nights and staying through Sunday afternoon, and she'd become Timmy's safe person besides me, someone he trusted completely, who had been there during the worst parts. She talked about moving closer to us for good, maybe finding a job in our city so she could be nearby if we needed her instead of 2 hours away in Boston. I told her she didn't have to mess up her whole life for us, but she said family takes care of family, and after everything we'd been through, she wanted to be close enough to help. The FBI closed their Torino family investigation with multiple convictions and the total dismantling of their drug operation that had been running for over a decade. Clifford called me one afternoon to say that my accidental discovery of the buried money had ended up being the break they needed to take down an organization they'd been investigating for 5 years without making real progress. He said I should feel good about that contribution to justice. But honestly, I just felt tired and grateful that Timmy and I had survived. I started a new job at a company across town after spending 3 weeks sending out applications and going to interviews. My old employer had been understanding about the arrest and told me I could come back once the charges got dropped, but I couldn't face walking into that office where everyone knew about the accusations, even though they turned out to be fake. The new job paid slightly better, and none of my coworkers knew anything about what happened unless they decided to Google my name, which I hoped they wouldn't bother doing. Timmy went back to the school after missing 3 weeks, and his teacher knew about the situation and promised to watch for signs of trauma or behavior changes that might need attention. He was doing okay with his schoolwork and keeping up with the other kids, but he was way more anxious than he used to be before all this started. He worried if I was even 5 minutes late picking him up from the school, standing by the fence scanning the parking lot until he spotted my car. He needed me to tell him constantly that everything was fine and we were safe and nobody was coming after us anymore. Anita said this kind of constant worry was normal after what he'd experienced, and it should get better over time with continued therapy and consistent routines. One afternoon, while we were eating dinner at our kitchen table, Timmy put down his fork and asked me why bad people wanted to hurt us when we didn't do anything wrong. I struggled to find words that would make sense to a 7-year-old, trying to explain that sometimes people make terrible choices that end up affecting innocent people who just happen to be in the wrong place. I told him the world isn't always fair and bad things happen to good people, but there are also good people who fight to make things right when they can. He thought about this for a minute, then asked if we were the good people in our story. I told him yes, we definitely were, and so was Aunt Larissa, who dropped everything to help us, and Aurelia, who fought for us in court, and all the other people who stood by us when things got scary. Aurelia became more than just my lawyer after the case ended, checking in regularly to see how Timmy and I were doing and making sure we were okay. She helped me understand my legal rights regarding the settlement money and showed me how to protect it for Timmy's future instead of just spending it. She said cases like mine were exactly why she became a defense attorney in the first place, because the system fails innocent people way more often than most people realize, and someone needs to fight for them when everything goes wrong. The settlement money let me put a big amount into a college fund for Timmy that would grow over the next 11 years before he needed it. I set aside enough to cover several more years of therapy sessions if he needed them, which Anita said he probably would. I also bought a better car to replace my old one that barely ran anymore and was always breaking down at bad times. Then I planned a weekend trip for Timmy and me to visit Larissa in Boston, his first time leaving our city since everything happened. He was nervous about the trip, but also excited to see where his aunt lived, and Larissa promised to take him to the aquarium and let him sleep in her guest room. The change of scenery seemed to help him relax during the drive up, watching new places go by through the car window instead of staying in our apartment thinking about scary things that had happened. While we were dealing with our own recovery, Quentin kept digging into the police department corruption and found 2 more officers who were taking money from different criminal groups, the same way Brooks had been working with the Torinos. The department brought in outside investigators to look at their evidence handling systems and found so many problems with how they stored and tracked evidence that the chief had to hold a press conference apologizing for letting it get so bad. They put in new rules about who could access evidence and installed cameras in all the storage areas and made officers sign logs every time they touched anything. It felt weird knowing our nightmare led to all these changes, but at least other people might not get screwed over the same way we did because the system failed so badly. 8 months after Timmy found that chest on the beach, we finally had something that felt like a normal life again, with regular schedules and predictable days. Timmy went to the school every morning and I went to work, and he had therapy twice a week with Anita, and Larissa drove down most weekends to spend time with us. The FBI agents who had been watching our apartment for months after the Torino convictions finally stopped coming around, and I used some of the settlement money to put in better locks on all the doors and windows, plus security cameras outside that sent alerts to my phone if anyone came near our door. Both Timmy and I felt safer being able to check the cameras and see that nobody was lurking around, and the new locks were solid metal instead of the cheap ones that came with the apartment. We were learning how to live with what happened, instead of letting it take over every thought and every day. One evening, while we were eating dinner, Timmy put down his fork and asked if we could get a dog because he thought it would help him feel less scared when he was home. I called Anita the next day to ask if she thought it was a good idea, and she got excited and said having a pet to take care of could really help his emotional recovery by giving him something positive to focus on and a companion that made him feel protected. Larissa offered to help watch the dog during the day when I was at work, and Timmy was at the school, so the next Saturday we drove to an animal shelter across town to look at dogs that needed homes. Timmy walked past the first few kennels looking at all the dogs jumping and barking, but then he stopped at one with a medium-sized brown and white mixed breed that was just sitting calmly watching people go by. The dog came over when Timmy put his hand near the fence and licked his fingers, and Timmy looked up at me with this huge smile and said this was the one he wanted. The shelter worker told us the dog was about 3 years old and had been brought in after his previous owner moved away and couldn't keep him, and he was gentle and already house-trained and good with kids. We filled out the adoption papers and paid the fee and brought him home that afternoon with a leash and food bowls and a bag of dog food. Timmy named him Captain because he said every treasure hunter needs a captain, and that first night, the dog slept on the floor right next to Timmy's bed like he knew his job was to keep watch. As the calendar moved toward the 1-year mark since we found the chest, I started feeling anxious about that date coming up because I knew it would bring back all the memories of the threats and the arrest and everything terrible that followed. I mentioned it to Anita during one of Timmy's therapy sessions, and she suggested we create a new positive memory on that exact date instead of sitting around thinking about the bad stuff that happened a year ago. Larissa drove down the day before the anniversary, and we all piled into my car early in the morning to drive to an amusement park about 2 hours away that Timmy had been begging to visit for months. We spent the whole day riding roller coasters and spinning rides and playing the games where you try to win stuffed animals, and we ate way too much cotton candy and funnel cake and hot dogs. Timmy laughed the entire day in a way I hadn't heard since before that Facebook post destroyed our peaceful life, and watching him be a normal, happy kid again made me realize we really were going to be okay eventually. We took Captain with us, and he waited in the car during the rides, but got to walk around the park with us and eat bits of our food, and Timmy kept saying it was the best day ever. During one of Timmy's regular therapy appointments a few weeks later, Anita called me into the room at the end of the session looking pleased, and she told me Timmy had spent the whole hour talking about things he wanted to do when he grew up, and places he wanted to visit, and normal kid dreams about the future. She said this forward-looking perspective was a major sign of real healing, because for months, he had only been able to focus on scary things that already happened and worry about bad things that might happen next. He was developing healthy ways to cope with stress and anxiety, and while he would probably always carry some effects from the trauma, he was building resilience that would help him handle difficult situations in the future. I asked if we could reduce the therapy sessions since he was doing so much better, but Anita recommended we keep the twice-weekly schedule for now and maybe drop to once a week in a few more months. One afternoon, I got home from work and found a letter in the mailbox from the federal prison where Brooks was serving his sentence. And when I opened it, there were 3 handwritten pages explaining how he got involved with the Torinos because of gambling debts that got out of control. He wrote that he never intended for an innocent person and their kid to get caught up in his corruption, and he thought about what he did to us every single day, and he knew his apology couldn't undo any of the damage or give back the months of fear and trauma we went through. I read the whole letter once while standing in the kitchen, and then I tore it into pieces and threw it in the trash, because his regret didn't change anything about what Timmy experienced, or make the nightmares go away, or erase the fact that my 7-year-old son had to hear men threaten to kill him. A few weeks after that, Larissa called with news that made Timmy jump around the apartment cheering when I told him. She had found a job in our city and was moving into an apartment about 20 minutes away from us, which meant she would be nearby permanently instead of just visiting on weekends. Timmy was so excited to have his aunt close that he insisted we help her move in, and we spent a whole Saturday carrying boxes up to her new place while Captain explored all the rooms. Larissa started coming over for dinner twice a week, and she showed up for every one of Timmy's school events and therapy appointments and soccer practices. Having family that close made both of us feel more secure, like we had backup people who cared about us if anything ever went wrong again. The FBI called one morning to say they were done with the wooden chest itself since the money had been the important evidence, and they asked if I wanted to pick it up from their evidence facility or if they should dispose of it. I asked Timmy what he thought, and he said he wanted to keep the chest as a reminder that we survived something terrible and came out okay on the other side. We drove to the FBI building and signed papers to get it released, and then we took it home and cleaned off all the remaining sand and salt stains until it looked almost new. Timmy decided to use it to store his favorite toys and books, and he told me it was his treasure chest now, but the real treasure wasn't money. It was that we were safe and together, and nobody was trying to hurt us anymore. My job started feeling like a positive part of my day, instead of just something I had to do to pay bills. My coworkers were friendly and included me in lunch groups and after-work activities, and my boss was reasonable about time off, when I needed to take Timmy to appointments. About 6 months after starting there, my boss called me into her office and told me she was promoting me to a senior position with more responsibility and better pay. The extra money meant I could put even more into Timmy's college fund every month and build up our emergency savings account in case anything unexpected happened. Having financial stability helped reduce the constant background anxiety I'd been carrying since the arrest, knowing we had a cushion if something went wrong. When Timmy's 8th birthday came around in early spring, we threw a small party at our apartment with a few kids from his school, plus Larissa and Aurelia and Anita. I ordered pizza and baked a chocolate cake, and we played games and watched Timmy open presents while Captain ran around trying to steal wrapping paper. Watching Timmy blow out the candles and laugh with his friends and hug the people who cared about him, I realized we had built something new that wasn't the innocent, simple life we had before finding that chest. But it was actually stronger because we had survived the absolute worst things I could imagine and come out together on the other side. Captain started sleeping on the floor right next to Timmy's bed every single night, and whenever Timmy woke up from a nightmare, the dog was already there before I could even get down the hall. I'd find them in the morning with Timmy's arm draped over Captain's back and both of them breathing slow and peaceful. Anita noticed the change during one of our therapy sessions when Timmy told her about how Captain knew when the bad dreams were coming and would put his head on the bed before Timmy even fully woke up. She said the routine of feeding Captain and taking him for walks was giving Timmy structure and confidence he didn't have before, and the physical act of caring for something else was helping him process his own need for safety. When we got home that day, Timmy filled Captain's food bowl, and the dog sat patiently waiting until Timmy said it was okay to eat, and I watched my son smile at having something depend on him in a good way. About 3 months after the birthday party, a woman named Jordan started in the marketing department at my company, and we ended up eating lunch at the same table in the break room. She was friendly and easy to talk to, and after a few weeks of casual conversations about work stuff, she asked if I wanted to grab coffee after work sometime. I said yes, but told her I had a son who came first, and that I'd been through some difficult legal stuff recently that she should probably know about. Jordan listened while I gave her the basic outline about finding mob money and getting framed and fighting to clear my name, and she didn't run away or look at me like I was damaged. She asked thoughtful questions about how Timmy was doing and whether we felt safe now, and then she said she still wanted to get that coffee if I was interested. We started seeing each other once or twice a week, always making sure it didn't interfere with Timmy's schedule or needs, and she was patient about meeting him when I said I wanted to wait until I was sure this was going somewhere real. The call from Clifford came on a Tuesday morning while I was at work. The Torino family had exhausted all their appeals, and the convictions were final, which meant they were staying in federal prison for the next 20 years minimum. He explained that the remaining family members who weren't in prison had scattered to different cities, and the FBI had no intelligence suggesting anyone planned retaliation against us. The organization was effectively dismantled, and we were no longer considered at risk. I sat at my desk after hanging up and felt something release in my chest that had been tight since the day those men showed up at our apartment. That night I told Timmy that the bad people who scared us were locked up forever and couldn't hurt us anymore, and he asked if that meant we were really, really safe now. I said yes, we were really, really safe. Timmy's 1-year anniversary with Anita happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon, and she called me into her office after the session to give me an update. She said Timmy had made remarkable progress over the past 12 months and was now sleeping through most nights without nightmares. His anxiety was down to manageable levels, and he could talk about what happened without getting overwhelmed or shutting down. She credited his natural resilience and the strong bond we had, and the consistent support system we'd built with Larissa and everyone else. Timmy would continue coming once a month for ongoing support, but he'd reached all the major milestones she'd hoped for when we started. I shook her hand and thanked her for helping my son heal, and she said families like ours were why she loved her job. 2 years after Timmy found that chest on the beach, our lives looked completely different in the best possible way. Timmy was 9 years old and thriving in 4th grade with a solid group of friends who came over for playdates and video games. He'd joined a local soccer team and scored 3 goals in his last game, and his coach said he was one of the most improved players on the team. My boss promoted me again with another raise that let me max out Timmy's college fund contributions every month, and I was considered for a management position that would start next quarter. Larissa got engaged to a wonderful guy named Noah, who worked as a teacher and treated Timmy like he was already family, taking him to baseball games and teaching him how to throw a football. We'd all healed in our own ways and at our own speeds, but we definitely healed. Aurelia called one evening and invited Timmy and me to an awards ceremony where she was receiving recognition for her work on wrongful prosecution cases. The event was at a hotel downtown with maybe 200 lawyers and judges and other legal people, and Timmy wore his best button-up shirt and sat next to me in the audience. When Aurelia gave her acceptance speech, she specifically mentioned our case as an example of why defense attorneys had to fight against institutional corruption and never assume the system was working correctly. She talked about how an innocent father and his young son nearly had their lives destroyed by corrupt cops and fabricated evidence, and how close we came to a terrible injustice. Timmy leaned over and whispered that Aurelia was like a superhero, and after the ceremony when we congratulated her, he told her exactly that. She laughed and hugged him and said we were the real heroes for surviving everything that tried to break us and coming out stronger. The next weekend, I drove Timmy to a beach about 3 hours away, nowhere near the one where he'd found the chest. We spent the whole day building elaborate sandcastles and collecting shells and playing in the waves like normal people having a normal beach day. Timmy found a piece of smooth green sea glass worn down by the ocean and ran over to show me with this huge, excited grin on his face. I pulled out my phone and took a photo of him holding up the sea glass with the ocean behind him and his hair all messy from the salt water. This time I opened Facebook and wrote a caption that said, "My son found actual treasure today," and the treasure was just that piece of worn glass and the pure joy on his face. I hit post and put my phone away and went back to building sandcastles with Timmy. That night at the hotel, I checked Facebook and saw the post had gotten maybe 40 likes from friends and family members. People left nice comments about what a great day it looked like and how much Timmy had grown. Nobody showed up at our hotel room door. Nobody called with threats. Nobody tried to track us down or hurt us. It was just a completely normal Facebook post about a completely normal day at the beach, and that normalcy felt like winning the lottery. Timmy and I were taking back the simple, happy moments that got stolen from us when I posted that first photo, reclaiming them one small piece at a time. A few evenings later, Timmy was helping me make dinner when he asked if I was glad he found the chest, even though it caused so many problems. I stopped chopping vegetables and thought carefully about my answer because I wanted to be honest, but also help him understand how complicated it was. I told him that what happened was terrible and scary, and I wished we'd never gone through it, but it also showed us how strong we could be and how many people cared about us and how important it was to fight for what's right, even when everything seems hopeless. Timmy nodded slowly and then said, "So basically, yeah, but also no," and I laughed, because that was exactly right. We started creating new family traditions that became the foundation of our healed life. Every month, Larissa and Noah came over for dinner, and we'd cook together and play board games and just enjoy being family. We planned annual trips to places Timmy wanted to explore, letting him pick the destination and help plan the activities. Every other Saturday, we volunteered at the animal shelter where we'd found Captain, walking dogs and cleaning cages and helping other families find their perfect pet. These traditions built up positive memories that slowly outnumbered the traumatic ones, creating a life defined by what we chose to do rather than what had been done to us. Timmy kept a calendar on his wall marking all our special family events, and sometimes I'd catch him looking at it and smiling about something coming up next week or next month. We'd survived the worst thing I could imagine, and now we were building something better than what we'd lost. 3 years after the Facebook post that changed everything, I'm sitting on metal bleachers at Timmy's soccer game watching him run down the field with the ball, and when he kicks it past the goalie into the net, something shifts inside me. I'm not just relieved we survived or grateful we're safe anymore. I'm actually happy about the life we built from the wreckage. Timmy runs toward me after the whistle blows, with this huge grin splitting his face, and Captain starts jumping around on his leash beside me, barking with excitement, and I hear Larissa cheering from 3 rows up where she's sitting with her fiancé. This moment right here, this normal Saturday morning at a kid's soccer game with grass stains and orange slices and parents yelling encouragement, this is what winning looks like when you've lost everything and clawed your way back. We survived armed men at our door and corrupt cops and federal charges and a frame-up that almost destroyed us, and now we're here watching my son play soccer like millions of other families across the country. That night after we get home and eat dinner and Timmy takes his shower, he climbs into his own bed without hesitation, and Captain jumps up and curls into a ball at his feet, like he does every night. I stand in the doorway, watching Timmy's eyes get heavy, and within minutes, he's asleep, with this little smile on his face, probably dreaming about his goal, or the pizza we're getting tomorrow, or some other completely normal kid thing. The nightmares still come sometimes, maybe once every few weeks now instead of every single night, but the good dreams outnumber the bad ones by a lot. I check the locks on the front door one more time before heading to my own room, and I think about how we survived the worst thing I could imagine and came out stronger and safer and surrounded by people who actually love us. That's the real treasure we found, not in some barnacle-covered chest buried in the sand 3 years ago, but in learning how much we could endure together and still choose joy on the other side of all that darkness.